Are they going to let my mom in? Is there anything that could come up that would make the community not take my dad? My mom is so nervous. She's afraid she's not going to pass. These are all statements I've heard from families when it comes to the nurse assessment. I'm your host, Valerie Lynn, and while the nurse assessment may be a requirement, and yes, there are lots of questions, is it a test? Could your loved one fail?
Welcome to Desperately Seeking Senior Living, a podcast for sons, daughters, grandkids, spouses, and all caregivers who suddenly find themselves tangled in the search for senior living and care. If you like today's episode, don't forget to subscribe and check out our doable download in today's show notes for a printable summary of the show and a bonus tip. You're listening to our doable tips, short answers to your questions. Don't see your question listed? Send us a note. Then don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an answer.
Hi, and welcome to the show. I remember being so surprised when I first heard these concerns about the nurse assessment. So many families over the years have been concerned, and so many of their loved ones are genuinely nervous about this part of the process. But I was surprised because I knew something they didn't. I sometimes have to remind myself that whether it's industry language or just the way things work, what I've been doing for years is most likely your first time. In episode 78, I talk about the logistics of the nurse assessment, why it's required, how it works, and what will be required of you. So definitely check that out. But in this episode, I'm going to address why it feels so scary, give some insight into how to prepare, and we're going to talk about some of those red flags. Now, in this episode, I'm only addressing assisted living. Stay tuned for an episode dedicated to strategies for those with Alzheimer's or other types of dementia. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss it. The nurse assessment is part of the assisted living process. This assessment is how the care team creates a roadmap to your loved one's care, and it's also how they will determine the cost for that care. In episode 67, I answer the question, can you negotiate the cost of care? The answer is yes, and it's through the nurse assessment that you just might be able to do that. So let's dive into some of the reasons why there's so much worry when it comes to the assessment. Many families think that no one will be able to care for their loved one. And the reason I know they think this is because they tell me. And maybe this is you. You're thinking about that phone call when the TV remote stops working every day at 4 p.m. Or how your mom calls you every time she hears a noise, sometimes in the middle of the night. The many phone calls about the light bulb being out, or your dad's oxygen not working right, or the grab bar in the bathroom is loose again. Or maybe it's the opposite. Maybe your dad never calls you. You just find tools everywhere and pieces of cabinets or furniture because he's trying to fix everything and you know it's not safe. You're worried he'll do the same in assisted living. How are they going to help someone who doesn't ask for it? Or maybe your mom or dad or aunt or uncle or grandma, neighbor, friends or sister is a bit of a complainer. Okay, who are we kidding? They are never happy about anything. And listening, ignoring, responding, and making many trips to their home has been your burden for so long that you just can't imagine that anyone would take on the job. You may even be tempted to downplay just how bad things are. And what about your loved one? Maybe they're expressing their worry, or maybe you can just tell that your mom is really nervous. Many times we actually see this during the assessment itself. You're thinking to yourself, your mom knows these answers. Why does she keep looking at me? Just the thought of an assessment makes so many families nervous. But what happens when the assessment itself goes wrong? Okay, I want you to think of a time when a doctor's visit didn't quite go the way you expected. Maybe you were really sick and the nurse or doctor was rushing you through the visit. Or maybe you were having a bad day and their questions and responses were really rubbing you the wrong way. Or maybe you were fine, but left wondering if they had chosen the right career path because their bedside manner was not their strong suit. I worked with a family who was already nervous about the assessment. It definitely felt like a test to them. I didn't even really find out how nervous until after the assessment. I don't usually go with my clients to the assessment unless they request it. Most of the time, the assessment is done because you really like the community. And this probably adds to the anxiety. You want your mom to move into this community, and the assessment potentially stands in the way of her getting in. Now, listen, I'm going to share this story, but before I do, I want you to know that this was not normal. And what I'm about to share doesn't happen very often. But this family went to the community for the assessment, and the nurse, let's just say, didn't have good bedside manner. Not only did she not make the family feel welcome and comfortable, but she spoke over their loved one, addressing the family for most of the assessment. She also rushed their mom through parts of the questions and then just stopped the assessment and said, "Your mom is not a good fit for our community." Right there at the table. Not only was it embarrassing, but the family was devastated. And as an advocate for the family, I thought I had crossed all the T's and dotted all the I's. But in the end, it's the nurse's decision and the community's and the nurse's license potentially on the line. In episode 115, you'll find tips if you disagree with the assessment. But keep in mind, the nurse that gives the assessment will be a part of your loved one's care. And they're going to be creating and managing what's called a negotiated care plan. More on that in an upcoming episode. Basically, you're a part of your loved one's care plan. But if you and your loved one aren't feeling welcomed and secure, then maybe it's not the right community, regardless of their decision. So, is the nurse assessment a test? Well, yes and no. There actually is something called a mini mental. Yes, I know it sounds funny. And I'll say that again, mini mental. This is a test that doctors and senior living communities will use to measure cognitive ability on a numbered scale. This number is usually used by communities to determine if someone is okay for assisted living or maybe better suited for memory care. And this score could be a red flag for a community. So let's talk about some of these red flags. There are certain situations that an assisted living community can't accommodate your loved one. These could be developmental disabilities, schizophrenia, or diabetes with sliding scale insulin, or cognitive impairment. Many seniors have said to me, "I hope I pass the test." Many adult children have said, "I hope they take my dad." But 99% of the time, if you've shared all the good and all the challenges, either with me as your advocate or with the marketing team at the community, then red flags or concerns should be detected and addressed prior to the assessment. Let me say that again. Red flags or concerns should be detected and addressed by the assisted living before they subject you and your loved one to an assessment. But sometimes, at 1% of the time, either the different departments within the community aren't communicating, or you're working with someone new to the team that doesn't know they take certain mental health diagnoses, for example, or there's something on your parents' medical record that you weren't aware of, and the community missed it before the assessment, or sometimes even after. I believe in over communication. In fact, when I know there are challenges, the marketer at the community may even be thinking that I'm trying to talk them out of taking my client. But having worked in senior living communities and knowing what can happen, what I'm really trying to do is prevent something from slipping through the cracks. But even after all that hard work to prevent a miscommunication, it's even happened to me. Hopefully, it's not after move-in day that the community says they can't meet your loved one's needs. And yes, that has also happened. And I feel like that could be a whole nother episode. I want to pause here because I think it's possible that you're listening and you know of someone right now who is having to move their loved one out of assisted living because the community is saying they can't care for their loved one any longer. And your friend or coworker is so angry because the community told them their loved one could live there forever. They thought they were done moving. And this is actually happening right now to one of my clients. In Washington state, there's something called a disclosure of services, and I'm hoping your state has them too. This very long document states exactly what a community can and can't do when it comes to care. This can help prepare you for that possibility that the day could come when you have to move again or supplement with your own caregiver through in-home care. Technically, the nurse assessment is a test, but you usually have all the answers. You probably know if there's cognitive impairment. You know if your loved one requires more attention. And if you've been a caregiver who manages medications, you usually know of any complicated diagnoses. But whether or not the community accepts your loved one and accepts the responsibility for their care is a decision that's usually left up to one person, the nurse, or sometimes a couple of people, the nurse or the executive director. I've even seen decisions get rolled all the way up to the regional level. You're not alone if you're feeling nervous about the assisted living nurse assessment, whether you think no one can care for your loved one or you've already had a bad experience. But hopefully, this episode helps you know what to look out for, what questions to ask, and hopefully helps make your journey a little more doable.
Today's episode is brought to you by ClearPath Senior Living Solutions. ClearPath helps families find assisted living, memory care, and other resources. Find our contact information in today's show notes. Check out this episode's doable download in show notes for details including industry terms and definitions we discussed, as well as a bonus tip from our guest. Have questions or your own tips to share? Leave us a message. We'd love to hear from you. And until next time, make it doable.